I never thought a hedge trimmer could land me under red and blue lights. But there I was at 8 a.m., standing in my own front yard, with a trimmer in my hand, and two police cars rolled up like I'd robbed a bank. My neighbor, the HOA president, was on her lawn, pointing at me like I'd announced war on Sunny Meadows, shouting that I was breaking the law. By the time the officers walked up my driveway, the whole sleepy street had turned into a stage, and I suddenly realized this small, ordinary Saturday had just detonated everything. My name is Harold Thompson. I'm 72, retired from 40 years of teaching history, and for the last 20 years this house and this yard have been my life, and the last living thread of my late wife, Margaret. She loved the garden. Tending it made me feel close to her. So every Saturday morning I'd be out trimming hedges, planting, pulling weeds, the kind of quiet ritual that keeps a life stitched together. Until one morning it became everyone's business. Act 1. The Spark and the Blow-Up. Sunny Meadows used to be a real neighborhood neighbors. Knowing neighbors, block parties, borrowed tools, and cups of sugar. Then our friendly HOA president moved to Florida, and Karen Mitchell took the gavel. She treated the rule book like scripture and herself like the high priestess. Gnomes got citations, basketball hoops got fines, front doors got judged for color shades, and the place turned from friendly to fearful. People stopped chatting over fences because a violation notice might be waiting in their mailbox. I'd kept my head down, well-groomed lawn paint within the approved palette, no offending garden decor. But 6 months before the police arrived, I helped my neighbor Jessica. She's a single mom juggling 2 jobs and an 8-year-old, and her yard needed help. I mowed and weeded because it felt right. 2 days later, I found a notice in my mailbox saying I'd violated a rule property maintenance must be performed only by the owner or a licensed pro. Apparently helping a neighbor is now a legal gray area, at least according to Karen. At the next HOA meeting, I stood up and pointed out how ridiculous it was. Karen listened like she'd been interrupted, mid-sermon arms, crossed lips pressed thin, and announced that rules were rules. Exceptions would breed chaos, she said, and chaos would destroy property values. She even suggested Jessica might consider moving somewhere more affordable. That line, that casual suggestion that a struggling mother should leave her home, set my blood on fire. People nodded along, too scared to push back. Fear had crept into our neighborhood like a vine. So I kept trimming quietly every Saturday. I kept helping where I could. But on this particular late spring morning, after 20 minutes with my electric hedge trimmer, Karen appeared on her porch in a bathrobe, phone in hand, probably filming, then crossed the street and demanded I stop. She insisted it was too early, that power tools before 9 were excessive, and that she, as HOA president, had the right to order me to stop. I told her politely that city ordinances, not the HOA, set noise rules, and I was within them. She threatened to call the police. I laughed. It sounded crazy. Then the sirens started. 2 patrol cars pulled up, lights cutting blue and red across the tidy lawns. Suddenly, my Saturday morning was public. Officer Martinez, calm, steady, older, asked what happened. Karen shouted her version. I'd been making noise at 7:30, harassing her, refusing to stop. The officers asked neighbors if they'd heard a disturbance. One by one, folks testified I'd been considerate, that nothing was out of the ordinary. Mrs. Chen said Harold does this every Saturday. Jessica said she'd been making breakfast and heard nothing disruptive. Karen sputtered, then turned to accuse us of conspiracy. Her eyes went hard. She was sure she'd be believed. She wasn't. Officer Martinez inspected my electric trimmer, and Officer Brennan, firm no nonsense, read the city ordinance out loud. No law had been broken. They warned Karen not to misuse emergency services and left. The street exhaled. Relief was immediate, but the moment didn't end there. Mrs. Chen walked down and told the officers that Karen had a pattern, that she'd been harassing people for months. It was like a leak that had been seeping for years, finally finding a crack, and once it did, the neighbors poured through. Act 2. The pushback and the twist. What started as a noise complaint turned into an unraveling. Neighbors who'd been too frightened to speak at HOA meetings suddenly found their voices. Stories spilled, threats over garden gnomes, fines for kids' basketball hoops, demands for people to move because they didn't meet some fantasy of perfection. As the officers listened, something else happened. A younger cop noticed Karen's car and pointed out an expired registration sticker. I'll let you picture Karen's face when the officer wrote a ticket for her vehicle while she was lecturing us about the law. Karma can be a curious photographer. After the initial humiliation, Karen promised revenge. She wasn't done. She hired a lawyer. I heard there were whispered plans. The next day, a surveying crew showed up at my property line at Karen's direction, another attempt to find something, anything to use against me. The surveyor found nothing. The hedges sat 6 inches within my boundary as they always had. Karen had spent money trying to manufacture a violation and failed. But the pattern was clear: escalate, intimidate, weaponize rules. That's when the real twist arrived, and it changed the game entirely. Karen sent an email calling an emergency HOA meeting 2 days' notice, proposing a $2,000 special assessment to pay for security and legal consultation because residents were challenging HOA authority. People panicked. $2,000 would crush neighbors like Jessica. But Frank and Mr. Johnson, two of our quietly brave neighbors, dug into bylaws and found the meeting was illegal. Assessments over $1,000 needed 30 days' notice and a 75% homeowner approval. Someone called the management company. The next night, more than 60 neighbors filled the community center, and a representative from Summit HOA Management, calm, authoritative Linda Hernandez, walked in and announced she'd been reviewing records. It turned out Karen had been misusing HOA funds, hiring her own lawyer without board approval, and making questionable purchases. Linda called for an audit and temporarily placed the HOA under management while they investigated, effectively stripping Karen of power in front of the whole community. The man who'd been the neighborhood tyrant crumpled in the space where her authority had been. People spoke, tears were shed, and the long-held fear dissolved into a different energy, not viciousness but relief and resolve. Act 3. The Reckoning and the Lesson. We held the line that night. The management company halted the assessment. They promised refunds where fines had been unfairly levied, and an audit that later revealed about $15,000 of misuse legal fees tied to Karen's vendettas. Karen quietly sold her house and left town. Sunny Meadows, bruised but intact, began to knit itself back together. What surprised me most wasn't the lawsuit that never happened or the money recovered. It was what followed. Neighbors started talking again. We created a fund to help folks who needed yard work done but couldn't afford it. We rewrote the rules to make sense, and we started meeting monthly to air concerns before they became accusations. The little revolutions were mostly small gestures. Mr. Johnson mowing across the street, Mrs. Chen tending her garden gnomes, Jessica and Emma planting flowers with me. One morning, Jessica brought over a small potted plant for me. "For you," she said, and the gesture hit me like sunlight. There's a lesson in all this, and it arrives slowly like the smell of cut grass after rain. Rules are tools, not weapons. Power is supposed to serve the neighborhood, not punish it. And kindness, the humble, stubborn kind, can be a better strategy than fury. I tried to reach out to Karen before things went nuclear. I offered conversation, empathy, a chance to be human together. She refused. Later, she sent a letter admitting she'd seen a therapist, that her need for control came from insecurity. I forgave her because Margaret would have wanted that. I forgave because forgiveness is a light that keeps you walking, not a safety net for someone else. The satisfying part, the catharsis, came not as an act of cruelty, but as a return to balance. The HOA was put under proper oversight, the assessment dead, the misused funds recovered, and the bylaws rewritten to reflect decency rather than petty control. Sunny Meadows stopped being a place of fear and became a place of neighbors again. There was justice, yes, but it wasn't theatrical revenge. It was accountability process and the community choosing to rebuild. So what did I learn? That standing up calmly, persistently, and with the support of people who think like you do can change things. Sometimes the smallest, quietest act of defiance, a man trimming his hedges at 8 in the morning, can pry open a neighborhood's scared silence and let light in. And sometimes, even when you try kindness first, you have to stand your ground. Because kindness without boundaries becomes mere surrender. Now here's the part I want you to chew on: was calling the police on a neighbor trimming his hedges a reasonable escalation, a legitimate concern about community standards, or an abuse of power and privilege? When does enforcing rules become cruelty? And when does standing up for order become protecting the vulnerable? Tell me, what would you have done? Drop your city and state in the comments. Share a time you stood up or were stood up to. And if this story landed with you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves good neighbor drama, or who needs a reminder that communities are built by people, not rule books.